This is not rage bait. I mean it when I say Obojima Tales from the Tall Grass is bad. And the reason it's bad is because of the cultural appropriation and probable Orientalism. Welcome to the start of my multi-part series, The Problem with Obojima. But before I dive further into this conversation, introductions! Hey folks, before we get into that, let me introduce myself. My name is VJ Harris. My pronouns are he, him, they, them, and something funny. I am a full-time tabletop role-playing designer and professional GM. You might recognize my name from things such as MC Productions, Arcadia, Fully Mortals, and An Elephant and Our Cat Little Baby, volumes 1 through 4. Before we get going, I've got something to show you. Hey, do you like werewolves? Did you like the dispatching part of the critically acclaimed game Dispatch by Ad Hoc Studios? If you answered yes to either one of those, then I think I've got a game that you're going to love. On Call, the werewolf dispatching game where you're a werewolf who isn't allowed to shift during the full moon phase, which is the day before, the day of, and the day after the full moon, because you have to be on call in case anything goes wrong with your fellow werewolves, their family, or the town, and it involves werewolves. This game is live on BackerKit now. At the time of this recording, it's currently made $771 out of the $3,017 is needed. I am doing this backer kit simply to fund having a layout designer, 2 artists, and an editor. Let me tell you how the game works. So you need 2d6 or 4d6 if you don't like re-rolling dice. You need a game master and 1 to 2 players. Throughout the game, you will be going on calls referred to as scenarios. While there is one scenario that is just very fun and energetic where you have to wrangle 3 toddler triplets who are displaying the agility and strength of werewolves way sooner than they should, there are also ones that are pretty heavy. There's one called Bully Teen, where Archer, who hasn't shifted and is 17 years old, is being bullied by their friends that have shifted, and they fall off a fucking cliff, and you have to go help them. You have to try and save them. Archer might die, depending on the decisions you make. If you want to hear more about how the game works and whatnot, you can go and check out my TikTok page and just look at any of the videos that kind of look like this. Peace out. Hope to see you at the backer kit. Alright, back to the video. Before I dive into defining cultural appropriation and Orientalism for you folks that don't know what that means, I'm going to get something out of the way. I'm not Asian. I'm specifically not Japanese. I bring that up because Studio Ghibli is largely influenced and reflects Japanese culture. I'm African American, so you might be asking yourself, why are you doing this? Why do you care about this? Well, the answer is simple. I support my friends and contemporaries that do share those identities. The conversation around Orientalism and cultural appropriation in the TTRPG space has been going on for years, decades, and it still continues to this day, thanks to things like Obojima. It shouldn't always be on the shoulders of people affected by a topic to educate others. I get having to always be the one to advocate for issues that affect me, and I've been lucky to have allies help bear the load, so here I am. Now let's define Orientalism and cultural appropriation. The simple dictionary definition of Orientalism is style, artifacts, or traits considered characteristics of the people and cultures of Asia, the representation of Asia, especially the Middle East, in a stereotyped way that is regarded as embodying a colonialist attitude. It's a decent enough starting point for people unfamiliar with the topic, but Edward Said, author of Orientalism, defines Orientalism as a Western way of seeing and representing the East, the Orient, as exotic, inferior, irrational, and static, creating a binary that defines the West as superior, rational, and masculine, which served to justify European colonialism and imperialism by portraying the Orient as needing Western guidance or conquest. It's not just stereotypes, but a created body of theory and practice involving academics, literature, art, and policy that produces knowledge about the East that reinforces Western power, linking scholarship directly to imperial interests. Edward Said's book, Orientalism, is over 300 pages long, and while I would love to do a chapter-by-chapter reading, this is not that video. Let's move on to defining cultural appropriation, but don't worry, I'll tie both definitions into the topic of this video. Now, before I define cultural appropriation, I want to be clear about the reason I said probable Orientalism. For a long time, all I was getting was bits and pieces of the book because I refused to monetarily support these guys because from the jump, I knew it was cultural appropriation and I couldn't find a copy of it for free online. I have now gotten my hands on the PDF, courtesy of a follower who bought it before knowing the issue. But from the conversations my friends and contemporaries in the TTRPG space have been having, I'm certain I'll be able to back up the Orientalism argument, not just through what they've written in the book, but also the critiques that have already been made, which I will be sharing with you. So what that means is the rest of this video will be focusing on the cultural appropriation, and we'll go more in depth with the Orientalism as the series progresses. Okay, on to cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation is the adoption of an element or elements of culture or identity by members of another culture or identity in a manner perceived as inappropriate or unacknowledged. Charges of cultural appropriation typically arise when members of a dominant culture borrow from minority cultures. Cultural appropriation can include the adoption of another culture's religious and cultural traditions, customs, dance steps, fashion, symbols, language, history, and music, and so on. Indigenous people working for cultural preservation advocates of collective intellectual property rights of the originating cultures, and some who have lived or are living under colonial rule have criticized cultural appropriation. According to American anthropologist Jason Jackson, cultural appropriation differs from other modes of cultural exchange such as acculturation, assimilation, or diffusion. Jackson describes cultural appropriation as something that is thought of as focused outward and done to a certain party. According to Jackson, cultural appropriation can be sources of pain and can bring about feelings of loss or violation for the community affected. Opponents of cultural appropriation see cultural appropriation as an exploitive means in which cultural elements are lost or distorted as they are removed from their originating cultural context. Cultural elements that may have deep meaning in the original culture may be reduced to exotic, fashion, or toys by those from the dominant culture. In her book Outspoken, A Decade of Transgender Activism and Transfeminism from 2016, Julia Serrano defines cultural appropriation as problematic only when it involves at least one of three interrelated harms: erasure, exploitation, or denigration, EED. According to her analysis, appropriation becomes harmful, what she calls EDD appropriation, when members of a dominant or majority group adopt aspects of a marginalized group's identities, cultures, or expressions, while simultaneously erasing the context in which those identities or cultural forms emerge, ignoring or obscuring the voices and lived experiences of the original community, exploiting those cultural forms for material, symbolic, or commercial gain, benefiting appropriators financially or socially without returning value to the marginalized group, denigrating the marginalized group by treating those borrowed identities or cultural elements as trivial, exotic, or disrespectfully, reducing them to stereotypes or mocking them rather than respecting their meaning and significance. Serrano further distinguishes these harmful EED appropriations from what she calls non-EED appropriation, cases where adoption or borrowing does not result in erasure, exploitation, or denigration, and may even positively support or amplify the minority community. She argues that not all acts of borrowing or cultural exchange are inherently oppressive. Rather, the ethical problems lies in whether the action inflicts structural harm through erasure, exploitation. Now, while I disagree with Serrano's framework of EED and non-EED cultural appropriation, I think the only way for cultural appropriation to be non-EDD is to be cultural exchange, which is different than cultural appropriation. And the reason I believe that is because I majored in the topic, essentially. I think the framework of erasure, exploitation, and denigration is perfect for the start of this series. We are going to look at the second E in EED specifically, exploitation, exploiting those cultural forms for material, symbolic, or commercial gain, benefiting appropriators financially or socially without returning value to the marginalized group. There is no question that Adam Lee, Ari Levitch, and Jeremiah Crofton, the lead designers and writers for the project, are benefiting monetarily from Obojima. Out of the $10K they asked for, they made almost $1 million. There's no way to know without asking them, and I doubt they'd want to answer this question for me, about how much they've made off of Obojima across the official website, Amazon, D&D Beyond, 1985 Games, and BackerKit late pledges. In late 2019, early 2020, Dungeon Craft Volume 1 was created by 1985 Games. I own Volume 1, but had no idea 1985 Games were the people that made it. I didn't actually know who 1985 Games were until Obojima was announced in 2023. And I know that's true for a lot of people. The creation of this setting gained them notoriety, but that's not all they've gained. 1985 Games now also has a direct partnership with Wizards of the Coast, as demonstrated by Obojima being sold on D&D Beyond, next to other companies such as Ghostfire Gaming, Cobalt Press, Chaosium, NCM Productions, Hitpoint Press, and Mage Hand Press. With the downfall of the DMs Guild, thanks to iSlop, being able to sell products on D&D Beyond, which is reserved for companies, usually, is extremely lucrative and extremely hard to accomplish. Obojima has opened doors for Adam, Ari, and Jeremiah that weren't open to them before, which echoes a long history of POC, but specifically Asian people in this moment, not being at the forefront of opportunities around products that use their culture. The creators of Obojima are following in the footsteps of D&D from TSR to Wizards of the Coast when it comes to profiting off of various Asian cultures. From 1985 to 1990, TSR published 10 products that used elements of various Asian cultures: Oriental Adventures, Karatur, The Eastern Realms, OA1, Swords of the Daimyo, OA2, Knight of the Seven Swords, OA3, Ochimo, The Spirit Warrior, OA4, Blood of the Yakuza, OA5, Mad Monkey vs. the Dragonclaw, OA6, Ronin Challenges 2nd Edition, OA7, Test of the Samurai 2nd Edition, and Monstrous Compendium Karatur Appendix 2nd Edition. Of these 10 products, there is not a single Asian person listed as lead designers or writers, or even just writers and designers. Oriental Adventures is the only product that gives any credit to Asian adventures. To the Japanese players, Masataka Ota, Akira Saito, Hiroyasu Kuroso, Takafumi Sakurai, and Yuka Tateishi for critiquing and improving the manuscript on short notice. Hey folks, one quick thing before we dive back into it. I did my best to find the correct pronunciations for everybody's names. However, if I was incorrect in those pronunciations, I deeply apologize for that and will make sure I do better in the future. Okay, let's get back to what I was talking about. And even with that, there's no evidence they received any monetary compensation for their critiques and manuscript improvement. Wizards of the Coast for a while didn't have a much better track record. The only thing I can credit them with is not having an abundance of these products. The 3rd edition update of Oriental Adventures had 0 Asian writers, but the cover was done by Raven Mamura. Tome of Battle, the Book of Nine Swords, was a supplement heavily focused on high fantasy martial artist Dragon Fist, and AD&D 2e variant focused on wuxia Chinese fantasy are the last 2 old school products that use Asian culture, and neither of them have any Asian people as writers or designers, as far as I can tell. Also, just a little side note about Dragon Fist. Look at this fucking credits page. Look at it. I was looking at it, and as I continued to look at it, it pissed me off. This is bad visually and culturally. Okay, back to the topic at hand. It wouldn't be until 2021 with the release of Candlekeep Mysteries that we would see Asian creators credited as authors, and then again in 2022 with the release of Critical Role Call of the Netherdeep, Journey Through the Radiant Citadel, and Spelljammer Adventures in Space, as far as I can tell. Now, I would be remiss to not add that outside of designers and writers, there are Asian people credited in Obojima, including a cultural consultant, and from what I could find, at least 1 artist. As far as I can tell, outside of the initial payments to the various contributors to this product, Obojima hasn't actually given back to the culture they're exploiting and bastardizing in some cases. Before I wrap up this video, I'm going to support my claim of bastardization. First, I'm going to make a statement of reality. Studio Ghibli movies are part of Japanese culture. While there are other elements involved in the storytelling method and the topics within the movies, it's quintessentially Japanese art in animation form. Second, another statement of realities. Monsters are never just monsters in any Studio Ghibli movies. They aren't just creatures to blindly kill because they are ontologically evil. There is always more depth in them, and despite that being a core tenet of Ghibli movies, we have this statement from the 3 white guys that made this product.
As soon as you do that, as soon as you humanize the faceless monster, now you got a huge problem. Now it becomes this morally nuanced thing. Like it just becomes, it ceases to become fantasy adventure. So you run into that problem. Keep monsters monstrous because you need to have things to kill, and you need the cartoonishness. Like you cannot look too deeply into this thing and make it like there's cinematic and there's simulation. If you keep it cinematic and cartoony, you'll have a good time killing monsters. I mean, you know, when we were creating Obojima, we were like, okay, you need some antagonists, and these fit the bill, like the fish folk, the howlers, demons. These are the things that are threatening the idyllic lifestyle of Obojima. Without them, you know, the game would lose some kind of drama, some kind of peril, and also some kind of thing that if you roll up a fighter, you need to defend, you know, your village, or you need to kind of beat back the howlers. And you know, one of the ways to do that is to like create these kinds of monsters, but then also to make them kind of cartoonish enough where they're kind of extreme, like, you know, I think of things like if you take like the World Wrestling Federation, like your villains are just cartoonishly bad.
Yeah.
And you know, they're they've got the ones who are like the kind of the dumb ones, are like duh, and they're just over the top, and you know, and then they're selfish and greedy. And that was kind of the deal with these guys, was like, we need monsters to be monstrous and to stay monstrous. We need them to not be able to develop a higher culture other than just being sort of like reptilian brained, fight, flight, selfish, greedy,
live in the moment.
In the moment. Yeah, they're not. They don't have the capacity to think about literature, or to create civilization, or to create like, well, let's build a pyramid and let's align it to the the 4 cardinal points, like,
or even like reflect on the makeup of their society. You know, like that's these.
Hey gang, Editor VJ here real quick. So I just want to let you know that if you try and go and find like the actual podcast where I got those clips from, you're not going to be able to find it, because upon sharing that Let Monsters Be Monstrous thing on TikTok, on YouTube Shorts, on their podcast, they got backlash from people like me, people like Kai, people like Connie Chang, people like my friend Jim. People were talking about how what they were saying was the antithesis of Studio Ghibli and a very clear example of why white people shouldn't be doing this kind of thing. And then they scrubbed it from the internet. How do I know they scrubbed it? Because when it first happened, I downloaded the video because I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to talk about this. And I thought I was gonna do it pretty immediately, but I did not. But then when I was making this video and editing and going to look for the video, I couldn't find it. I wasn't sure where I saved it at. So I went looking for the video on YouTube and TikTok and et cetera, and it was gone. They got rid of it. They said what they said, they got pushback, and then they were like, I'm not gonna stand on business, we're just gonna get rid of this. So yeah, anyway, back to the video. This clip is quite literally the antithesis of what Ghibli is. It's, like I said, a bastardization of this particular art form, but that's where I'm gonna leave this video. Oh, one last thing. In the description, I have a Google spreadsheet that has all the names of the Asian contributors for 5e products and where you can find them, and if they have it, links to other works so you can support them. And of course, I've linked to my friend Kai, who kickstarted me talking about this and whose content I will also be using through the series. I've also included links to any of the work by Connie Chang, who has also been at the forefront of some of these conversations, as well as the people involved in Asians Represent, and of course, my good friend, Legal Kimchi. That is it for now, folks. Thanks for being here. See you next time. Peace out.